Hello, my name is Jessie Scott, and I'm a video artist, programmer, writer and producer from Naarm, Melbourne. I'm completing a practice-based PhD at RMIT University about the relationship between video lending libraries and artistic communities. And my paper today is called Cinema Without Architecture, on the video shop as interior and memory palace of film culture. This paper is derived from both the research and practice I've been doing over the last 5+ years. My project has a major oral history strand, whereby I've been accumulating an archive of interviews with video shop clerks and owners and video and media artists who used video shops throughout the 1980s, 90s and 2000s. I'll reference those interviews as well as some of my other artistic projects throughout this talk, and most of the video and photography you'll see is my own, unless otherwise credited. This is an overview of my project, and I just wanted to mention that outcomes include a feature-length documentary, a pop-up video art lending library, and an artist game. To talk about video shops in an architectural context, I must first acknowledge that there is no architecture of the video shop. Video shops were originally, and continued on mostly, as suburban infill. Their buildings were adaptively reused from other businesses before and after they came and went. And unlike the milk bars and pubs of the Antipodes, or the Pizza Huts of North America, they are almost erased from the landscape now completely. As such, I think it's most productive to think of them as interiors, rather than as architecture per se, as a box that was filled with what Ed Hollis called meubles, the French word for furniture, as in removable objects, which, though impermanent, nevertheless defined the way people moved through, interacted with, and understood themselves in a space. On one hand, this interior space of the video shop was simply a room lined and filled with rows of shelves, mostly head height, full of videos, initially VHS and later DVDs. The initial logics by which they were assembled were pragmatic and commercial, with as much ode to a retail paradigm as libraries or cataloguing. So voracious was the consumer demand for new videos that many video shop owners in the 1980s were under constant pressure to simply fill the shelves. Some of these genres came across readily from the cinema, some from television, and some were born of VHS itself. And by their own admission, many video shop owners confessed to me they were not film buffs at all. But when they emerged, video shops were simply a boom industry that many different aspiring small business people bought into. However, regardless of the intent, the resulting diversity of content available as home video in video shops and lending libraries was entirely novel. A labyrinth of physical traces of public dreams that an individual could navigate across multiple matrices, skipping across temporal and generic hierarchies through and back from high to low and past to present. In this paper, I will look at this interior space of movable objects through a number of frameworks to reveal how and by what mechanisms they became such generative creative spaces, how they blended hapticity and oculocentricity, how they operated as a cognitive space, as a memory space, and as a social space. I will also talk about how these incidental or unanticipated conditions of the video shop enabled new knowledge, cultures and practices to emerge and spread through the broader community. The blended space. The video shop was a cluttered, physical, visual, haptic, and kinetic experience that patterned seamlessly into people's daily lives. Much how, as businesses, they patterned into the high street scene, amongst the laundrettes, takeaway food outlets, milk bars and news agencies. Going to get your videos of a Friday night in the 1980s and 90s was fulfilling a basic act of maintenance, like buying milk and bread, cleaning your clothes, getting dinner, or paying your bills. They were at a human scale rather than a godly one, and existed in the realm of Pallasma's haptic city, where one experiences oneself in the city, and the city exists through one's embodied experience. Where the cinema offered a seductive and gleaming denial of the body, a promise to merge into the sonic screen, the video shop sensorily called to it, and then made itself available. Eye-grabbing video boxes that were designed to be picked up, touched, held, passed from hand to hand, satisfyingly clicked open and shut. You walked through them weighing the video boxes literally while you weighed their potential as selections. Dropping your videos through the return chute, the clack on the pile beneath signified the end of one loan cycle. The susurrating slide of a pile across the counter past the threshold of the security barrier, indicating the beginning of a new one. Simultaneously, the video shop was also a collage of oculocentric industrial marketing, originating from film studios and heavily graphic designed. Standees, hanging displays, cover art, all were arranged to draw first the eye rather than the body. However, this imagery, once extracted from the planar cinematic and dropped into the video shop interior, transformed into just so much stuff. Where the cinema had previously overwhelmed the individual could now hold a piece of the cinema in their hand. The effect of this blending of the oculocentric and the haptic was to produce obtainable cinema, to paraphrase Erica Balsam. Not just for film buffs, not just for intellectuals, but for almost everybody. In effect, the video library accelerated what Siegfried Zielinski called the literaturization of audio-vision, which had begun with VHS, turning it from something you sat in to something you could stand outside of, opening up a physical and critical distance that greatly affected how artists related to film. VHS allowed people to treat a film like a book, delinearizing the narrative once you could fast forward, rewind, pause, stop and record. The VHS library allowed people to do this across decades of film culture, across disparate geographic locations and genres. Artists now had an inroad into what had previously been a mystified realm, and new techniques of referencing and quoting that had been available to musicians and sound artists for decades. Here is video artist Cassandra Tytler, who was also a clerk at Video Busters in inner city Collingwood, talking about the effect of this on her video practice at the time.
I wasn't really ever interested in making short films, but there was something specific about the moving image, about the way you can use the moving image and incorporate that with sound, and the whole performance within that, and how genre works within that, and how everyone can recognize that, those genre references. There was something about the power of that that really propelled me and really interested me as well.
Cognitive congeniality. So the quote on screen by Juhani Pallasmaa, I think, is a beautiful summation of how the body relates to designed space. And in this section, I'm going to talk about the mental or cognitive implications of that. So this physicality and hapticity of the video shop shifted our embodied and power relation to cinema, but it also had powerful cognitive implications. In Doing Things with Things, David de Leon argues for constructing cognitive biographies of things, focusing on the physical changes undergone by the artefact over time, and drawing out the cognitive corollaries of those changes. In other words, his example is that of a spice rack, observed over 30 years and analysed for its cognitive congeniality, i.e. the degree to which its various arrangements aid cognition and thus facilitate its use. Rather than analysing a video lending library through the more common scope of marketing and merchandising, as Daniel Herbert and others have done, or with the loose socio-political inflection of Franco Moretti, I think it's salient to apply a cognitive frame to the function of video lending libraries and find many useful analogies between de Leon's spice rack and the video and DVD racks of the video shop that help to explain how the hapticity of this lived space not only made them nice places to be, but facilitated creation of culture. In de Leon's analysis of a spice rack, he describes the physical arrangement of items on the shelf, how this allows the user to quickly navigate 100 plus spices with a minimum of cognitive burden. The spices are organised by genre, as you can see on the left, groupings that allow the cook to make more cognitively efficient generalised choices before drilling down into more specific ones. When one is removed for use, the blank space left behind indicates immediately where it is to be returned. This correlates quite easily to the genre-based organisation of videos in a video shop, especially within independent and art house ones, where staff often took initiative and glee in organising ever more specific subgenres based on their own collecting practices. And I think it should be noted that, unlike in a library where you need to understand a cataloguing system, these systems you didn't have to have experience of before, so they were accessible to everyone, expert and inexpert alike. Some other examples of this: you could tell immediately in a video shop what titles were in high demand by the numerous dummy copies stacked behind the covers. And classically, if you noticed that most spines were facing out, that indicated a large range of titles, whereas if the covers were facing out, that implied they were trying to fill space to mask low stock. On the left is a diagram from de Leon's cognitive biography of a spice rack, showing its evolution over time. Ben Cavelli, one of the founders of Video Busters, an independent chain in Naarm, Melbourne, gave cognitive biographical details of how their flagship Collingwood store, a destination for artists, filmmakers and film buffs across the city, was set up. A team of managers from other outlets proposed the idea and then set about cherry-picking the best art house, classic, auteur and cult films out of their own stores to populate the shelves of the new Collingwood site. This formed the nucleus of the collection and the generic framework around which future acquisitions were made, building in subgenres around those basic umbrella categories with the specific knowledge and interests of subsequent staff and managers, all centering on the director's wall, an example of which is on the right-hand side from Video Zone in North Fitzroy. Cognitive congeniality is of course not unique to video shops. Indeed, similar analyses could be made of all kinds of libraries and lending collections. One of its most powerful examples, shared across all I would argue though, is the simple condition of limitation. You entered a video shop and you could immediately assess at a glance how much was there. You could get your head around it, and then you could start to carve it up in a more or less logical way. With familiar and stable regimes of organisation you could anticipate, new releases, 3-day loans, action, horror, etc. There was an infrastructure in place to take you from the general to the specific in a located, contextualised way. Here, film programmer Tania Lentini talks about how these cognitively congenial structures aided discovery at Video Busters.
Video Busters in Collingwood was kind of perfect for me because there was so much opportunity for discovery. So they'd have like a big catalogue that you could sort of rummage through. I'm pretty sure they had online computer catalogues. And then they had, like, it was divided by genre, but then also divided by director. They'd have staff picks. So there was so many different ways of exploring the video store. So it wasn't so overwhelming, and then you had so many opportunities for discovery.
The defining quality of a video shop, though, was its rich browsability. Much more akin to a record or bookstore than an archive, the videos were vying for your attention. Their cognitive congeniality combined powerfully with vivid merchandising to grab your eye with novelty, as well as place your choices in a familiar genre context. Colours, themes, and even font choice would telegraph such information immediately, and this collision of visual stimulation could be surprisingly productive in terms of how it affected customer choices. For example, the proximity of one section to another meant that your gaze could be easily shifted from something you were seeking to something you'd not anticipated. An art house film sitting on the same shelf next to another more generic title, for example. Or vastly different films might be merchandised in the same way in an effort to slot them into a particular genre and thus market them more effectively. Artist Diego Ramirez, who often works with film references in his work, talks about his artistic process, born in this rich cultural humus of the video shop.
Well, I really miss video shops because my research process is basically just sinking in and immersing in the thing that I'm interested in. So with video shops, it was just a matter of going to an aisle and just blasting through the movies and just going every week and just grabbing 5 DVDs and just watching them. But I mean, I feel like that logic of organizing things cinematically and exhausting the movies that exist within that category is like a video shop logic.
Many of these effects were unintentional and yet provided unique conditions for the generation and maintenance of screen culture that drew artists and filmmakers, academics and writers into video stores along with the general population and provided an in for non-experts to discover. For example, the Berlin-based Australian video remix artist Sodajerk described how their first long-form video, Hollywood Burn, was entirely based on the idiosyncratic genre arrangements of their favourite video store in Bondi Junction, Dr. Watt. The strange linkages it produced between different films, directors and genres being utterly crucial to Sodajerk's creative process. As you can see in the slide, there are references in this work from old Elvis films, Ghostbusters in the 80s, The Ten Commandments, and I believe that's Eric Bana as the Incredible Hulk. Thus, the boundedness of the video shop, which held to some sort of containment and order, combined fruitfully with a more generalised chaos as limited space and commercial imperative butted up against each other, and peripheral vision and eyelines gave access to unanticipated discovery. In a video shop, the possibility of discovery keeps opening up. As artist Ian Haig put it, it was exciting, you never knew what you were going to come away with. The Memory Palace. Edward Hollis's The Memory Palace posits that physical interiors, the great unstudied subject of architecture, are collages, constructed conversations between the past and present, and goes on to draw a detailed picture of how our interiors, both grand and modest, function as aides memoire, telling ourselves a story of who we are, what we do, and what it might mean. Or as he so eloquently puts it, interiors do not just remind us who we are, where we're from, or how to behave, they remind us to remember. This analogy of an interior as a memory palace is drawn from the ancient technique most commonly associated with the ancient Greeks, but also practiced by many First Nations and non-literate cultures, including Australia's, of impressing places and images on memory, as Francis A. Yates put it in The Art of Memory. The ancient Greeks explicitly used architectural structures, while other societies used features of the landscape, or handheld memory objects like those shown on screen. And while in the West we have mostly abandoned the pedagogy of memorising banks of information routinely, there is a place in contemporary life where the analogy and actual mechanics of the memory palace still hold true. Libraries, collections, and archives are places where knowledge is still intricately mapped against objects in space. A video shop, as a form of collection and library, were memory palaces of film and culture at large. Varying periods and genres of film were held in the same place, like the interiors described in Hollis's book, whose memories operate over diverse durations, as he put it. And the containing of these disparate cultural artefacts within the walls of the video shop transformed them from industry detritus to Wunderkammer. You could suddenly traverse from any point on this web to any other, rather than being locked into the linear flow of film history with its short memory. There was a way to glance across its horizon, as well as venture down its more narrow paths. These shops became a web of totemic memory prompts, activated both by individuals privately browsing through the store and collectively by the conversations held between customers, amongst staff, and between the two groups. This web of memory, like an interior, is an ephemeral subject made of permanent objects, in Hollis's words, and is part of the material culture of the video shop era that provided a rich medium for considering film and video as contextualised, historicised, broad and inclusive art forms. And in the same way as memory spaces of the past were activated by wise people who retrieved the knowledge encoded in those spaces through ritual and performance, so was the knowledge encoded in a video shop performed by its users. It is this performance of memory that my game, Video Shop Algorithm, draws upon to revive the social and cognitive conditions of the video shop. Playfulness and performativity has a huge role in how film knowledges are maintained. Think of Sight and Sound's community-constructed list of 100 best films of all time, or film trivia nights run by cinemas and festivals for highly competitive film buffs keen to display their knowledge. Video Shop Algorithm revives this playful performance of film memory and knowledge, allowing players to collaboratively construct a mind map of their shared knowledge of film, each title added to the board and connected to others via different conversational constraints. For example, if you like that, you'll also like this, you might like this. The players are rewarded for increasing the number and density of connections on the map, externalising and building on each individual's film memories and knowledge, using only VHS and DVD cases as prompts with no recourse to online databases. The visual web that is literally drawn through this process is a metaphor for the web of memory that each and every video shop held in its own community, spinning out from the objects themselves, facilitating endless connections. And here's just some more documentation of the kinds of diagrams that result from playing different versions of the game. They're really interesting documents in and of themselves that can be read post-fact. The video shop as social space. So, video shops were not in fact just mute, inadvertent physical and cognitive arrangements. They were also an important social space and locus of screen culture, a way for a certain subset of people to find each other. Spiro Economides, the current director of Melbourne Queer Film Festival and former employee at Video Dogs and Video Busters, talked at length about how the video shop supported community, providing a containing space for interactions and connections to be made. People came in wanting recommendations, and this stimulated discussion between staff and customers, and also among staff members who were putting together watch lists and highly recommended sections, and developing their own tastes and sensibilities, which filtered out into the community and broader culture via this process, which I've talked about a little bit in this talk. The constant imperative to handle stock, both as customer and as video clerk, was not just a secondary factor of the materiality of these spaces, but in fact a central one. Juhani Pallasmaa argues passionately in The Eyes of the Skin for an architecture that involves the body, not just the eye. The lived space that he envisions is better design because it considers the ways we as soft-bodied humans actually exist in our buildings, arguing against the flattening and dehumanising effects of oculocentric design. In this paper, I have looked at the video shop as a lived space, through its combination of hapticity and oculocentricity, its cognitive congeniality, as a memory palace and as a social space, examining how these qualities, often not by design, are worthy of note because they help support a vibrant and influential screen culture that has lasting effects in media art and popular culture to this day.